Um, Ron, I wouldn't want to have to speak after Lauren, but you are. So Ron Avi Astor is a professor at USC. Somewhat miraculously, a consensus has emerged in our field that the best way to reduce aggression and violence in our schools is to create a culture of caring. Ron's studies on climate and school safety include thousands of schools and millions of students in countries across the globe. He has written and spoken with grace and intelligence about how to create caring schools. He will share some of his thoughts and findings with us. Ron.
I don't know if that's to say thank you for being here, that sound? I want to first thank you. That touched me, and I know you're living it right now and you're still going through it. We were talking a little bit through lunch in terms of that the school is still very hardened right now with helicopters and police officers, and so the message that we have here is not something that's done. It's still ongoing even at this school, and to the point where I think your words, I wish we could have those folks listening to you right now, and maybe they are through C-SPAN.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to read the first part, and then hopefully the PowerPoint will go through, but I'm a bit emotional. So, as you heard, we are amid a national battle about the vision of what our schools should be. How to create citizens of a society that are A+ human beings in addition to A+ students, as you so wisely said. How to create a learning and thriving optimal environment where interactions between students, teachers, parents, and the community create a better union within our schools and for the future of our fractured society. Indeed, we are debating not only what we want our schools to be, but also what we want our society to be. Our students continually put forth the voices of truth, of the present, as well of the future. And again, thank you. In this context, we gather here today to focus on the voice of science, specifically asking how could we protect students of our country from feeling unsafe, feeling victimized, physically and mentally injured, or as we've seen too often from death while at school. The fact that shootings or death happen at higher rates in other settings doesn't impact our resolve to reduce and eliminate intentional and unintentional harm and death in schools where students are mandated to attend. That is a major reason why we're here. If you go to the next slide, please. We have two visions of our schools. One vision of our nation's school safety believes that the path for lasting safety comes from welcoming, caring, and supportive schools, that the focus on school safety, social emotional learning, and community is in addition to great academics. This vision also advocates for humane social supports, institutional linkages, and community resources for those students struggling with mental health, social obstacles, family, and community strife. And we have somebody who's doing that firsthand here every day. Thank you. Another vision focuses mainly on the shooting and after the shooting itself, using tools that originated in law enforcement, prison architecture, military strategies, and a more restrictive approach that aims to protect students from extreme forms of murder under firearms. Next slide. But this is not just an opinion or a societal debate. There's decades of well-conducted, large-scale studies conducted from all over the world that strongly support one vision and not the other. Next slide. There's multiple comprehensive reviews covering hundreds of international studies, large-scale epidemiological studies. I've done many of them with my colleagues. And we found in these studies done over decades in many different countries that when schools have positive climates with integrated social emotional learning and supports, as you just requested, they actually have improved students' isolation on campus, all sorts of bullying, verbal, physical, sexual harassment, and the relationships between students and teachers and students in a natural way, not just a therapeutic way, is healthy and helps these students thrive. Our research from all over the world, and some of our samples have millions of students in them, also show that when you have a very good climate and strong social emotional measures that are integrated into the DNA of the school, not just programs coming from the outside, but what the principal believes, what the teacher believes, what the students are actually doing, that you actually see weapon reductions as well. Weapon use, being threatened by a weapon, and even knowing about a weapon on school grounds. Next slide, please. We find that when these schools happen naturally and the principal and the teachers are behind it and it becomes part of the DNA, what I call central air rather than window air conditioning, then you actually have all these vulnerable groups that have separate programs for them. All of them have reductions in a whole array of risk factors. Today we're talking about violence, but in our studies we see the reductions also in substance use and a whole other array of things that we've been looking at. This is true for immigrant groups, LGBTQ, military and veteran-connected students, Jewish, Arab, and Christian students in Israel, students in vulnerable populations in Taiwan, Kosovo, Albania, Serbia, France, Cameroon. Those are only some of the countries that we have studies in right now that we could see the reductions in. Next slide, please. But when you try and change culture through large-scale interventions, again, when the SEL and the climate is integrated into the school, you actually see positive things actually happen. They're not all the reduction of negative things. You see actually communities being built, empowerment, connectedness that goes way beyond just fixing a problem. We see in our most recent reviews that academics actually are better. One of our recent ones showed not just violence, but mathematics got better, reading, writing. So these are connected with each other. And most importantly, the most recent work that we've done shows that it decreases inequality by reducing the achievement gap. So there's a lot of value to these kind of early prevention, social emotional. So what happens when you integrate these things into the DNA of the school? I'm going to go to the next slide. We just got these results in just a few weeks ago. After 7 years, this is in 145 schools that were part of a DODEA-funded grant working with military-connected kids, but we also had a whole school approach. With over 100,000 students, the combination of moving climate, SEL, and bringing resources to the schools produced a 55% reduction in gun carrying on school grounds. That's reported by the students. 37.5 reduction in knives, guns, and other clubs on school grounds and threats of an injury. 40% reduction of students actually seeing a weapon on school grounds or knowing about it, and a 44% reduction in gang affiliation. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about seeing a weapon on school grounds. Usually people would say that's not a climate issue, but if we have 20 to 30% of kids in California, depending on the last 20 years, actually report that, and we look at those schools, we have the data for all 10,000 schools in California, then we see that that actually impacts climate, knowing that there's a weapon. That's not a separate issue. Knowing that there's a weapon on campus makes you feel differently about your peers, about how you feel about the school, about going, and that becomes a very important climate issue. The way we've done this in Israel, next slide please, is we've taken a national public health strategy, and I'm suggesting that we do the same thing here. We've had, there's some book flyers I put out that we captured all the work done from around the world and put it into real, regular language so that people could pick it up and use it in schools or school districts. Our work is actually based on student voice and empowerment. We use those surveys as a basis from the student voice to bring the data back to each of the 3,000 schools in Israel and the 145 schools that we had here to hear what the students actually think. We actually then bring the teacher's voice back to the teachers and actually have with the teachers and the principals. And we've done the same with bus drivers, cafeteria workers, yard aides as well to build upon this. Then the resources are actually matched to those various schools. It depends on their needs and desires and their cultural background and their past history. And each school gets not a one-size-fits-all, but they get something catered very specifically to their grounds. Next slide, please. So for example, in California, as I mentioned, if you just take the statistic of between 20 and 30% of students said they've seen weapons on school grounds, We actually know what each of those schools are right now. We could actually figure out which ones are high and which one we have. We've looked at it. And we could come up with, instead of just targeting students or people, we could actually look at schools that have very, very high rates, low climate, and actually provide more resources, provide more care, provide more training on welcoming, give the students voice and empowering, and move up just like we've done in Chile and in Israel. So I'm talking about doing this at scale. Even though it has to happen one student at a time, it also can happen at scale with the data that we have. One thing that we found in our work both here and in Israel and in Chile right now is that we have to pay special attention, maybe some of the other speakers will speak about this a little bit more, to students and teachers who have obsessions with arsenals. This has been coming up over and over again in our quantitative and qualitative work, and those are particular red flags. But what we're advocating for, again, not kicking everyone out the way our current hard line is looking, but actually providing supports from a very young age and going on for a long time. Last slide, please. Just want to raise this particular issue of alternative schools. Because when a child or a youth brings a weapon to school grounds and threatens others, there's many things that could happen in terms of working and supporting. But when this happens multiple times, we have a whole system of alternative schools that, again, the climate and the resources around those have not been looked at very carefully. We've just begun to look at them. I can tell you right now, the climate does not look very good for the California schools that I'm looking at, and the SEL supports are not very strong. And those things apply especially to this group that has been excluded from public schools for these kinds of reasons. And we have entire systems in special ed, DOJ schools, community schools that have been unattended to and neglected. I'd like to make sure that we actually stop this gap. One more slide, I'm almost done. Everything I said here is in, the method is in the mapping and bullying book. All proceeds are donated to anti-bullying efforts, as with all our prior books. And next slide. And this is the welcoming book. This is how you create good climates and how you welcome, actually a welcoming environment, particularly for students in transition. And final slide, and I'll be done. I'd like to thank you, actually one more. And there's resources. These are extra resources if you need them between the books and these and the other speakers who should be in good shape. And again, I would like to thank you because you're the reason why we're here. It's your activism and your voice and yours too. Appreciate that.